Next up, I have Ben Cleveland, the guard out of Georgia, who was actually a request, right? Back on the Landon Dickerson video, one subscriber said, hey, can you do Ben Cleveland? And, even though I said I might be done with the interior O-lineman, if you guys request somebody, I'll do my best to try and get them out. So here is Ben Cleveland, the guard out of Georgia, who, hopping straight in is an interesting guy, right? The first thing you're going to see is he's pretty massive, right? Georgia, they had him listed at 6'6", 335, weighed in at the Senior Bowl, actually at 6'6" and 3/8 inches, but 354, which was kind of questionable, and then came in at his pro day and was 343. So a pretty significant weight difference there. So I'm not exactly sure, was he just a little bit out of shape after the season ended, or what exactly was going on, right? Did he play the year at 350 and they just didn't change his weight on the website? I know that happens a decent bit, but still an interesting sort of fluctuation there if he actually did play this past fall at 335, right? That being said, some of the testing numbers at his pro day, given that he was 340 plus pounds, were wildly impressive, right? We're talking about a guy who did 30 reps on bench, which obviously is solid, had a 28-inch vertical, an 8-foot 6-inch broad, a 40-yard dash that has kind of seen varying numbers. I've seen anywhere from people saying a 4.85 unofficial to a 5.05. So in that range, certainly a fast guy considering his size, as well as a 4.88 shuttle, which definitely isn't as good as that 40, to say the least. The shuttle would actually be in the bottom 50 percentile, whereas that 40, if that's true at a 4.85, would basically be in the top 1% of any lineman that we've seen, especially at his size. So also some question marks in terms of just his background and experience at Georgia, right? He's a guy who on their website has listed him as having started games for each of the last 3 years, but he only started, I want to say, 7 of them last year, and it didn't appear that there were any injuries, which was kind of questionable to me. And then even, as I kind of got into the film, as you'll see, I put on that Notre Dame film from 2019, as well as a couple others, and he was in like some sort of timeshare or rotation at that guard spot, which is very rare to see, right? The only team I can really think in the NFL, at least, that pretty consistently would, or at least has in the past, rotated their linemen would be New England, right? I know Bill Belichick, obviously, he values that sort of position versatility and being prepared for every situation. So he likes to change where guys are lined up on that sort of front five occasionally within a game. Well, I hadn't really seen that before at the college level, especially to the extent that he was rotating in and out, right? Like I said, that Notre Dame game he started, couple drives in, got pulled for a drive or two, and then came back in later in the game. I want to say fourth quarter, had a pretty questionable drive and then got pulled again. So I don't know if it's performance-based. I don't know if it's just going with the hot hand. Not entirely sure what it was. If there are any Georgia fans who could actually, illuminate me in the comment section down below, I'd love to know just what exactly was going on there, because it was certainly questionable. It was him and number 77 who were rotating in and out. So if you guys know more than I do, I'd love to hear what it was. But from my perspective, outside looking in, it was certainly a little interesting, right? But otherwise, in terms of what he was actually doing on the field when he was playing, particularly in 2020, I felt like there were no real weaknesses with Cleveland's game, but I also don't know if there's any sort of overwhelming strengths, if that makes sense. You'll kind of see that throughout the grade. In terms of his pass protection, then I felt like solid. As I said, there weren't any glaring sort of issues that were hey, if you don't fix this, you won't be able to play. But there were a lot of sort of small compounding issues that I think caused him more trouble than necessary, right? And I think if he really wants to be a mainstay guard at the next level and be a consistent starter and a successful one at that, I think he would sort of need to clean up some of these things. So first and foremost would be his footwork. He's the first guy to this point that I've seen really flip his stagger into his pass sets. I don't know if you guys are familiar with what that means or not. Primarily as a right guard, right, you're going to see guys have their inside foot up, right? You're going to have that left foot, that sort of post foot up, and then your right foot back, right? This is typically because you're going to be kick sliding back most of the time to cover up that space and block 3 techniques, but you always want to keep your inside foot up because that's where you're stronger. That way, in case of an inside move or in case of that guy trying to cross your face, he's going to have a much harder time and more difficult time doing so with that inside foot up, right? That's why on the right side of the line, you're always going to see the guard and tackle have their feet staggered like this. On the left side, they're going to be staggered like this. And if I'm mirrored, obviously, when the video comes out, just sort of reverse that in your head. But you're going to want that foot closest to the ball up, right? Well, Cleveland, what he does is he starts with it there, but then as soon as he has to sort of have a power step, by example, some people call it just a post, some people call it a power step, as I typically do. I know in college we'd call it a one set, right? But whenever he, instead of kicking back on a 45-degree angle like so, whenever he would have to work down, right, so sort of towards the center, right, whether it was to block a one technique or to face a guy slanting his face, what he would instantly do, instead of simply picking this foot up, that inside post foot up, and moving inwards, right, sliding to his left, what he would actually do is flip his stagger and then go. And instead of actually covering up that guy with his feet, he would try and just sort of turn his hips and wash him that way, if that makes any sense, which actually for the most part gives that guy an easier path to the quarterback, right? Because now you've sort of opened the door for them to where, if you're not able to motor them down the line of scrimmage and whatnot, they're going to have almost a free path to the quarterback in that regard. He would get away with it a little bit more at the college level than he probably should have. That really won't happen at the NFL, especially when defensive tackles tend to be a good balance of strong and fast, whereas at college, a lot of the guys he was facing were more so either, these big, slow guys or sort of smaller, faster guys that he could push out of the way. At the NFL, they're going to be just as big as you and potentially even faster and quicker than you. So you're not going to get away with that on a consistent basis, right? Also, from time to time, when he was kick sliding out and working outwards to block that three technique, he would also sometimes just sort of click his heels together, get his stance too narrow, or his base too narrow, I should say, which I kind of went in depth on in the Tevin Jenkins video. Obviously, if you guys haven't seen that, click the link above my head. But at that point, your base is compromised, right? You have no strength when your feet are touching each other and a 300-pound guy is about to try and bull rush you, right? If you do that at the next level, which he didn't do all the time, right? Don't think that it's a Jenkins level issue, but it's something that he did it enough to where I would certainly work to fix it, right? And obviously, hopefully from the end of the season through now, he has been working on these things. And if not, hopefully he's going to be adept to picking them up early in training camp and into that rookie season, because I do think these are things that he's going to sort of need to learn at the next level. I thought that in terms of run blocking, I felt like he was pretty solid when the guy was in close proximity, right? Say even a 3-tech, 2-eye, 2-1-tech, etc. I felt like if they were sort of in that general phone booth, he would do a good job just with his strength. I know occasionally when he would get beat, in my opinion, it was due to his leverage. Didn't always play with the best pad level and didn't always do the best job of activating his lower body, right? Compared to a guy like Aaron Banks, who obviously I did in a previous video. If you haven't seen that one, click the link above my head as well. But Banks was a guy who did less reps on bench than Cleveland, but he played significantly stronger in my eyes. And that's in large part due to the fact that Banks is, getting those quads and hamstrings. He's getting and uncorking his hips and rolling them into his blocks and not just utilizing that sort of chest tries, traps, that sort of thing. Whereas I feel like on a lot of Ben's reps, he is more so leaving his hips hanging and not actually driving them through his opponents. If he could do that, I mean, we're talking about a guy who at his size, at his mass, could maybe be a 14 and a half type run blocker. He just hasn't shown that in my eyes to this point, right? And speaking on the power and strength, I did actually want to talk about this during the intro a little bit. A curious guy, right? I said he did 30 reps on bench at his pro day, came out before the pro day and said, I'm going for the combine record, which is 49 reps. And I'm obviously unsure of Mr. Cleveland's IQ and intelligence level. As you'll see, that's another grade later based on the on-the-field stuff. Man, I've never once had a teammate in, at Hillsdale, by example, right? We would test 3 to 4 times a year, right? Just bench, 225 test. How many reps can you do? Take that over 4 years, we're talking like 12 to 16 tests, right? Never once can I think of a teammate that fell short of what they expected and said they wanted to get by more than like 5 reps, right? If you were generally in that sort of 2 to 3 rep ballpark, right? That's where you were, right? If you thought you could do 25, you do 22, right? It is what it is. If you thought you could get 16 and you end up getting 19, great job, right? You had a good winter session of lifts, right? I've never once heard somebody say, yeah, I think I can get 49 and then get 30, right? That's highly questionable in my eyes. I don't really know what was going on there. Unless there was an injury, that just had me confused. I did have one teammate actually kind of make a run in that range, got 40 plus, but he didn't project that he was going to get 65. You know, he didn't fall 19 short as Cleveland did by example. And not that that had any real bearing on the grade. As you guys know, this is more so just film based. The only real testing measurements and whatnot that I implement in are on the size and athleticism. I just felt like his power and strength, 12 out of 15, was solid. I'm just curious where those other 19 reps went, because, you know, like I said, I've never had somebody be more than a couple off, let alone 33% off essentially, right? Or whatever it came out to, 30% there out of Ben. Just interesting. And maybe what he was doing was actually knowing that he was going to run a fast 40, say, hey, I'm going to break the bench press record, get all the eyes on him. And then actually what people care about more and be more interested in is the 40. So then he's actually getting the eyes there by saying the bench press and then performing fantastically in the 40. Maybe that was the whole sort of big brain play out of Ben. I don't entirely know. Or maybe he just severely overestimated his strengths. Not going to say one way or another, just sort of questionable nonetheless, right? Otherwise, in terms of physicality and finishing, I felt like he left a little bit to be desired. I will say in that Missouri game, completely different picture, right? That Missouri game was like first round tape. I'll be honest, late first round tape, potential like guard one stuff. The other 3 games that I watched, I felt like he was significantly more lackadaisical in terms of just finishing and playing until the whistle, right? I felt like the physicality was there, right? Particularly on those reps where he would activate his lower body, and then you're seeing guys really fly off that line of scrimmage. But otherwise, when he was just sort of utilizing that top half, and it was more so of a stalemate at the line of scrimmage, it just didn't really feel like he was finishing those and winning those stalemates at as high of a rate as I would have wanted. Otherwise, IQ and awareness, like I said, it was fine. I'm not docking him for not knowing what his max bench is, but still, I felt like there were some issues in terms of his pass protection where he'd get himself caught out on an island. In terms of maybe he should be setting here, but again, because he flips his feet, he's all out of whack, and now somebody's shooting the B gap while he's watching A gap, just by example, right? There were just interesting examples like that. There were also times where he just would be late to identify guys that are blitzing or twisting, which out of a guy with his sort of multi-year starting experience, albeit on a rotational basis, I would have liked to have seen that cleaned up. I just didn't. That's why the 6.25, not a bad grade, but certainly not to the level of some of the top guys. Otherwise, mobility is interesting now. People are going to see the 6 out of 10 and, hey, if that pro day number is true, the 40-yard dash, 4.8, 4.9, whatever it is, how is this not 10 out of 10, right? Well, again, this is a film-based grade, and I just simply didn't see that speed out of Ben in between the lines, right? When it came to blocking guys on the backside in particular, climbing to the second level as maybe a backside cutoff, as just by example, right? So he's the right guard. Say the play is a toss out to the left, right? And he's tasked with blocking that will linebacker. Generally what you're taught, or at least what I've been taught, is that you need to take like a very tight and flat angle, so that way you are cutting that off the next defender's butt, right? So if the next defensive lineman is a zero technique, that's as flat as you can take that angle to try and cut him off in space. I don't know if you guys can really visualize this, as I'm hoping you can, but just picture the plays going in one direction, everybody on the defense is flowing in that direction, and Ben's job is to cut that guy off in space, right? His angle, right? He needs to take a good angle to meet that guy where he's going to be, and the flattest angle you can take is, as tight to that next guy in the line of scrimmage as you can, if that makes sense, right? Because obviously you can't run through the nose tackle, but you can run right off his butt and then continue in space upwards downfield to hopefully cut off that linebacker. Well, that would be a good angle. Whereas Ben, it felt like a lot of times he would, instead of anticipating where that linebacker is going to be, he would sort of veer where that guy is already at and then just get beat and let that play sort of continue on to go make the play, right? And on those sort of tosses and outside zones and power plays, et cetera, oftentimes that backside block is sort of the big play changing block, right? Obviously it might not seem like it because you are so far removed, but that's really the first guy that oftentimes is going to be in on the tackle if the front side guys do their job. So you have to be sort of primed and ready to go and fire out of your stance and take that good angle, stay tight, as tight as you can to, like I said, that next man down the line of scrimmage, and ultimately Ben just didn't do that very well. And it is different for everybody, right? You know, compare me when I'm playing at 325 pounds, by example, to a teammate playing at the same position at 280. Our angles are going to be different, right? Because we have different athletic profiles. So to line up and get ourselves in position to block that linebacker at a certain spot in space and time, you have to know where you need to be and when you need to be there, right? And you know, maybe Ben is a great athlete, right? And maybe despite being 340, 350 pounds, he can move like no other. But if he's overestimating his athleticism, maybe similar to how he was on bench, or if he's just simply not understanding it and being able to anticipate and take those correct angles, that's a problem, right? Especially at that guard spot where a lot of teams in the NFL, they are asking you to play out in space more often than he sometimes was at Georgia. That could be a concern, right? Otherwise, we've talked about the massive size. We've talked about the good athletic testing numbers. Ultimately, that came out to a 71.25 for me, which, as we get into the big board, you'll see has him as sort of a middle to late third round pick in my eyes. I know in terms of where that grade placed him on my big board, particularly compared to his fellow guards and interior O linemen in the class. The next one up, as you can see, obviously not on the screen, but Aaron Banks, the guard out of Notre Dame, was right above Sam Cosmi, actually, at the end of the second round, early third round, in that range. And then you can see he's just above a little bit Trey Smith, the guard out of Tennessee. So I think he's sort of in between those guys in my eyes, where he has a sort of similarly high athletic profile, and the physical intangibles are there, akin to a guy like Trey Smith, but I just didn't quite think that the technique followed suit, which is why I have him slightly lower than Banks, but higher than a guy like Trey, who I felt like there was more work that needed to be done, right? He's further along in the process there technically than Trey. I think he's not quite as far as Banks, as well as the Wyatt Davises, Elijah Vera Tuckers, guys like that, that are up into that second and first round discussion. So with that being said, that's all I really have for you guys today. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you leave a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below. Obviously, if you've watched Ben Cleveland yourself and you have an opinion either way, do you think he is sort of that mid to late third round pick, or do you think he's higher? Do you think he's a second round guy, closer to say Wyatt Davis, or would you even have him lower and do maybe those fourth and fifth rounds? I know on various sites I've seen him vary pretty significantly, so I'd obviously be interested to hear your guys' thoughts on that. And lastly, if you did enjoy the video, make sure you subscribe, right? So that way you're constantly in the loop and can see more like it in the future. We actually just hit 90 subscribers the other day, on the road to 100. You could most certainly be number 91 or maybe even number 92 or 93 by the time this comes out. So hopefully you guys, if you are returning to the channel, you've enjoyed these last couple weeks of pretty consistent draft content here, and hopefully if you're new, you'll continue to enjoy some of the upcoming videos as we get closer and closer to the draft. So with that being said, obviously make sure if you have missed out on previous videos, you know, we've done like 56 of them, so click the playlist that should have just popped up on the screen. But otherwise, I think with that being said, I'm mic'd up, now I'm mic'ing out. Peace, guys.